Technical difficulties. Okay, everyone. Anyway, thank you for inviting me to do this talk. It's also going to try to do my best to live up to the previous speaker, because actually my talk, I think, is a little bit more fitting for yesterday's topic. Anyway, my name is George. I'm a coordinator of the Alias Research Network. We're an interdisciplinary group who studies the diversity of consciousness. Those are the places that give me money so I can be here. And anyway, I will move into my topic by kind of skipping over the mandatory William James quote and give a general feeling of like what the consciousness conference experience is like. So going to these ASSC meetings, I feel like maybe some of you already know this kind of meme when you're having these talks about what is consciousness. I always feel like the speakers make these kind of mental gymnastics where suddenly at some point you always arrive at this kind of hand wavy debate on, okay, how does mind come from matter? I don't know, this year we didn't have the kind of great debate format where that is just complicated further by all these people different theories competing against each other, like free energy principle or IIT. I feel like all of these kind of fundamentally speak around the problem. My approach to doing consciousness science is to kind of ignore the problem altogether and focus more on what I think are the kind of goals we can actually achieve. And this is like sort of what I want to focus my talk around, to give you a little bit of an insight into how VR could be used like within this kind of framework of synthesizing first person and third person data. So kind of in line with the consciousness project umbrella, and I think VR can fit into this on the one hand as a kind of causal intervention of conscious experiences. So we can use not only to study like the correlates between the brain events and conscious subjective events, but also to manipulate these with VR. And my other interest is how you can couple VR directly to the third person data. So how can you create bioresponsive interfaces so basically to use VR as a way of making biosignals, for example, more visible in order to kind of amplify what their regular ecological use cases and when we're having social interactions, for example. Yeah, I mean, yesterday we had many rubber hand illusion stuff, so I was not sure whether I wanted to include it or not, but I think they're like some pretty nice examples of how it kind of demonstrates like very first-hand principles of how strong the power of synchrony detection is.
Believe that this hand, this arm, is your arm. You see we've got this divider here. So right now you can kind of see your arm. You see the arm there. And I'm going to cover over.
So we don't have to see the entire video. I just want to highlight a few aspects of it that I think really come to life. So yesterday we were having a lot of discussion about how reliable.
One more time to train your brain.
Okay. What I think is nice about this example is that you can really see how when they're stroking only his arm, it elicits these very visceral reactions. So you can actually see how the body is kind of really immersing itself in this illusion.
Now you're gonna feel it when I tap it. You feel that?
Yeah.
And that. And
whoa.
That. Yeah.
Oh, right. This is making me nervous.
All right, here we go. I'll start lightly. Feel that on the thumb?
Whoa, yeah.
On the finger.
Oh.
The middle finger.
Whoa.
And the ring finger.
I'm totally feeling it in this hand. It feels
pinky.
It just, oh.
Yeah, so I don't know, like in the strongest version of this illusion, you could really see how you're hitting the hands, and he was making these kind of startle responses. So at first when I watched this video, I thought it was a little bit theatrical, like maybe the guy is just kind of playing it up a little bit, but I don't know, if you look at the kind of visceral reactions, then you see how convincing these illusions are in some people. And for me, this kind of illusion really just highlights some very basic principles in play. So how you can study the sense of the bodily self as a kind of plastic medium. I guess it also illustrates like these very basic predictive processing principles, which, for example, that there's a kind of top-down expectation that my hand is usually in front of me. And you have this kind of synthesis of the bottom-up incoming sensory information. And through the synchronous visual tactile stimulation, your body is basically trying to solve a problem, namely of how to minimize prediction error. Yeah, I won't pretend that I know the mathematics of predictive processing, and I'm an experimental psychologist, so I kind of just prefer the experiments. So my favorite way of demonstrating what predictive processing does is the example of sine wave speech, which is like kind of a speech spectrogram.
It was a sunny day and the children were going to the park.
So now you hear the original, and then we hear the sine wave speech again. You know, so after you fed in this prior information, you immediately update your kind of perceptual learning system to understand how all of this works. So these are like, you know, the kind of basics, but then how do we get to VR? What can we use VR for specifically in understanding like how the different dimensions of the self are intertwined with each other? So I want to just go through some of the kind of basic VR research that has informed our understanding, like beyond like the classical rubber hand illusion. Yesterday there was a lot about like the explicit sense of self-awareness and going from like this implicit to the explicit, but rather I want to do the opposite, going from the explicit to the implicit. And with the implicit sense of self, we mean this pre-reflective somatosensory self-awareness that is present in every day experiences. So some people like Metzinger and Olaf Blanke called this the kind of simplest form of self-consciousness, this because it seems to be kind of permeating through everyday life. But if we break it down to like these kind of more sub-dimensions of the implicit, then what the current literature seems to agree on is that you have these three dimensions to the self, this sense of body ownership, self-location, and the first-person perspective. So very basically, the body ownership is just the sense of mindness, so the feeling that this belongs to me. This is a little bit how why these avatar experiments work, because it kind of depends on these ocular motor contingencies. So you see the avatar moving and it's reacting in the same way you are, and your mind just kind of goes along with the transference of identity. Then you also have the kind of first-person perspective. So the fact that you can swap a perspective of somebody with VR and change their location. It also installs like the first-person experience. And then this idea of self-location, so that in a given moment, you always have a kind of representation of where you are in space. Why are these dimensions important? So some of them can be manipulated in VR and others cannot, or not through the same way. So for example, with these full body illusions, I rarely have the feeling that I'm actually being transported in space to somewhere else. But we can get to the phenomenology of that in a little bit more detail. So one of the main differences, if we look at like how the Erison group has been inducing the full body illusions, is that they use the front stroking paradigm. What the front stroking is, I'll just demonstrate in this video with the so-called Barbie doll illusion. So it's called a front stroking paradigm because you see yourself in the front view direction being stroked while the doll is also being stroked. So this is not a kind of unusual position to be in. And what you can do in this way is that you decouple your sense of body ownership from self-location and the first-person perspective. So you kind of transfer it to a doll, and the outcome measure they use here is looking at, well, you're being transferred to like from a bigger body to a smaller one, and then you kind of see how the subjective sense of space is changing. And then you can do this for like a bigger body or a small body, and then you try to quantify the strength. There they use like a bigger body, I guess. Anyway, moving on. Then we have this. Okay. Let's go back. Yeah, you can also do this inside of an MRI machine where you see yourself outside, put people in the scanner, and then you give people this sense that they're outside of the scanner. And usually what's interesting here is that you really have this kind of divorcing of your, like this ownership of the body seen from a distance. It's as if the body itself is deprived of somatosensory experience. So people report that they feel as if their body was completely cut off from the experience while this is happening. And then we get to like the kind of other, the way in which this experiment has been performed by Olaf Blanca, Metzinger, and Langenhager, where the kind of spatial incongruence in combination with the synchronicity is creates the so-called out-of-body experience. And the difference here is really that you see your own body being stroked in the back from an unusual perspective. So in difference to the front stroking paradigm, it kind of tricks your mind into thinking that you've actually left the body, which, it's like a simple difference, but has like these kind of subjective differences that you're testing. What is also nice about this experiment is that you can also use these to measure the peripersonal space. So what your peripersonal space is usually what you describe as the kind of immediate space around you. So it's like the space that you, some people might say would be within arm reach, and you measure this typically through this kind of simple synchronous audio tactile stimulation paradigm, which I will get into. Yeah, but what is nice with these kind of out-of-body experiences is that your subjective sense of how far your space is like actually changes as well. So there's like these nice neural and behavioral correlates that you can get with these type of experiments. It works by having like an audio stimulus that is presented to you at different distances, and you have a simultaneous tactile stimulation, and you just ask people to indicate as soon as they feel that they think that the two sounds occur. You have like it's like a simple report paradigm. Just say press a button when you hear these two things simultaneously. And you can measure this using like kind of a report paradigm with reaction time. So depending on the space, you have like these kind of differences between the reaction time. But you can also do this with like a kind of no report version where you get these ERPs with EEG research. Anyway, this is like a segue into, you can also use this kind of peripersonal space to measure encodings and disorders of consciousness. So there's this nice work by Andrea Serino, where they tested it to look at peripersonal space differences in people with consciousness disorders or just locked-in syndrome. So anyway, this is like my segue into like the actual topic of my talk, altered states of viscerality, on which I don't have any data, which is great because you can't criticize me while but yeah, you can give me your feedback and ideas at the end of my talk. I got a grant from the BL Foundation to incorporate these ideas on peripersonal space, and it was kind of inspired by my previous work on breathwork as a modality for inducing altered states of consciousness. There you just have a holotrophic breathwork session that was plotted back onto a scale assessing the subjective experiences of different doses of psilocybin. And my ideas going into it was to look at whether breath work can be used as a kind of modality for manipulating the peripersonal space. So what I wanted to do was like kind of couple the lung dynamics with the representation of space. So as I mentioned before, you can use virtual reality and the plasticity of self as a kind of medium to change well, everybody's looking at the self, but nobody's looking at the space, to kind of do it differently, that we don't change the self, but rather we couple the space directly to your biosignals. So, but why would we think that coupling virtual space to lung mechanics would have a difference? So there was these nice studies on looking at breathing affects production and perception of quantities. So in one condition, people are told to predict random events, like just imagine that you threw a dice and if it would be bigger, and you see these kind of differences of how after people inhaled, they generate larger numbers or larger quantities than after exhalation. You also have the same thing when you measure where you do it via perception. So people tend to estimate larger random numbers after inhalation than exhalation. Also, you have like respiratory pupil coupling. So there seems to be that there are various mechanisms in the body already there, such as the coupling of breathing with pupil size, as was demonstrated by this recent study. And other than that, there are various VR applications already that kind of try to incorporate breathing into virtual reality. So there's some of them are trippier than others. There's like Flowborn. You have like this kind of little polygon aesthetic. Or you have Deep VR. That for some reason also uses like a kind of underwater seascape breathing exercise, and realms of flow, which is a little bit more tricky. So for you VR enthusiasts, you can try this out at home if you have a VR headset, I guess. Yeah, and I took inspiration from many of these VR scenarios, but all of these are kind of built with this kind of wellness and optimization kind of ideal behind it. So breathing is seen as a parameter to stabilize, and what I thought, and I wanted to go beyond that by directly coupling the sense of space to the sense of breathing. Because like I said, the idea being that you have this embodied metaphor that when you increase your lung volume, that you associate that implicitly with a sense of space. And I would like to now conduct experiments where we measure personal space after inhalation and exhalation, and then also use VR to actually try to enhance these effects and see whether what kind of subjectivity would result out of that. Would people view the space getting bigger, or would they view themselves getting smaller? How could we like couple like maybe we could say that the space gets even bigger when the lungs expand, or do a reverse coupling? Will that give you this body illusion that, oh, my body is getting bigger? So yeah, these are, like I said, I don't have any data, but those are my wild speculative hypotheses. Okay. Anyway, also a lot of these peripersonal space measures have been done with binaural sound, so that you emulate the sense of space by creating spatialized field recordings. But actually, a lot of this can be now done with virtual reality, with like resonant sound SDK. So yeah, I want to incorporate these kind of the auditory element. I think is also like very important in designing like a immersive VR experience. And finally, this is just like a kind of, in a nutshell, this is like what I plan to now do in the next 2 years. So we want to kind of do this breathing biofeedback, synchronous, asynchronous, or the coupling of expansion of lung volume to the decrease of lung volume and vice versa. Also looking at different breathing types. So for example, holotrophic or Wim Hof. Also just conscious breathing exercises that you have in mindfulness with these kind of subjective measures through psychometric time series analysis, behavioral random number generation tasks, and like I said, the peripersonal space, no report paradigm. So trying to kind of have different levels and outcome reports. And with that, I have nothing more to say except thanking my collaborators and for your attention. I also want to do a little bit of advertisement for for the Alias Research Association. So in preparing for this lecture, I also asked Andrea Serino to give a journal club, which was really helpful in informing myself about this talk. We're a multidisciplinary research network, doing like monthly journal clubs. Feel free to join this one. This one will be held by Roy Solomon, where he's presenting data on the effects of psychedelics in survivors of the Supernova Festival in Israel. A bit of a hot button topic, but otherwise, feel free to visit the Alias Research website. Research isn't done in a vacuum, and we're looking for people who want to, contribute. Thank you for your attention.
Will you share the links on Slack?
Yes, for sure.
Thank you, it's great talk. Am I have missed Rockstroh, this breathwork real? What you actually show? You show your breath moving, or do you?
Like in the VR?
In VR, yeah.
Yeah, no, so we don't want to do the breath moving. It's more a little bit like, I don't know, in Fear and Loathing where the walls are breathing or something like that. So I want to create this kind of illusion that it feels bioresponsive, as though that whenever you're breathing, it really feels like the space is
space, something is synchronized and.
Yeah, so like so I want them to feel detached from the body, so that there is no body and that you're just feeling like this, they're actually only like in the expansion and contraction of space, but also to have it like kind of auditory, because with the peripersonal stuff, you have like these tones, and then to see, okay, if these tones are played in a way where the resonance is different because the virtual representation of space is different, whether we can elicit these kind of PPS index effect.
It's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for the interesting talk. One question, you kind of called the Langenhaar paradigm, like you rightly distinguish between front and back stroking, etc., and try to map onto those different factors like self-location, ownership, and that. But the Langenhaar paradigm you call like an out-of-body experience. Is that how I would probably frame it differently?
I think that's how they framed it. Like, so it's if you know more about this, I would about what the proper way. I mean, I don't know, but yeah. So maybe going beyond semantics, what is your critique with this label exactly?
Well, I think it's not an out-of-body experience. I think the main point is like something you kind of like line out. There's the perspective,
right? But
Langenhaar paradigm creates a third-person perspective on the body.
Right, but it depends on, well, I think the difference is that with the front stroking, it's not an unusual perspective. So there you're used to seeing your body in the front, and if you do that with a different body, then that's sort of according to the predictive coding framework, that's like the usual one. It's only that the perspective is different. But if you do it behind your back, then I thought the reason they call it an out of body, from my understanding, is because you feel it on your own body and you see it on your back, and you still associate that as being yours, but you're looking at it from a perspective that usually your brain doesn't have access to. So you're kind of make an assumption, an inference that you've left your body. That's how I understood it.
I think the main point is still the Langenhaar paradigm tries to modulate an ownership experience this way, and not by a true out-of-body experience where you leave your body, so to say, this way. That would be my, way of how to deal with them, those kind of factors.
Right. I'm still not understanding exactly where we disagree.
Maybe I should have coffee.
Yeah.
What manipulations have there been of this back of your body experiment? I mean, have they done like, you know, a hole in your body and stuff like this? And has there been manipulations of it to show this really the back of your body? Because I mean, the back of your body looks a lot like the front of your body in reality.
Yes. So what is?
You can make it wider or taller or funny shaped or something. Distortions, I mean.
Yeah. What is the? Can you make that?
I'm just wondering how far this has been tested, this idea that because you're looking at the back of your body, it's not the same thing as the rubber hand, because in the rubber hand you see like something you see all the time, right? So you get used to that, and that's an association. But with the back of your body, you say you've never seen it before, so it's a different thing, right? Just wondering to what extent manipulations have been done of that. I don't know the literature.
I mean, I think the issue here is that you can use these paradigms differently to elicit different subtle differences in the subjective phenomena. And the study I showed, for example, the research question is a different one, because in the front stroking one, you know, with the doll, they looked at, okay, how can we change mapping in space by swapping you with like a bigger or a smaller doll, whereas with the backstroking one, it was more about, okay, how does it affect the peripersonal space? So there they just looked at, okay, what I view as my immediate space is then somehow altered if I use a body swap to change the positioning of myself. So again, it's a bit like you can do these experiments and you have to. I feel like the issue is more of what your research question is rather than. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, people did many things. I don't know everything that anybody has ever done with a body swap paradigm. It was just more kind of highlighting, you know, these differences between the experimental setup of these as well and what you're measuring.
If there's no other questions, I have one, being asked to be a party breaker. But I'm sure you're aware that people have done some excellent work on the relationship between the suggestibility and the rubber hand illusion.
Yeah.
And in our own work in our lab, we find that a lot of reports that are on the first person basis are confounded by suggestion effects. Have you considered introducing an explicit control for that?
Yeah, like the phenomenological control question.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. No, I mean, I don't think I don't like the word confound, because I feel like those are just inter-individual differences. Yeah, I do think that there's something to be said about things like trait absorption, where you have exactly the same issues, I would say, with the psychedelics research or any other subjective phenomena. So I think there is that type of person who maybe also just likes rating the highest score on the questionnaire. So I don't know, I feel like if you're getting into subjective data that's measured with questionnaires, then yeah, you have problems like that. Suggestibility, I think some people are more prone to having these kind of immersive experiences, or like seeing shapes in fluffy clouds, and yeah, those kind of phenomena. Yes, I acknowledge their existence and that they should be measured. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. If not, thank you for a very interesting presentation.